see some justice after what happened. Who remembers Lois Lerner and the IRS scandal, right? Where they were slow walking after this Tea Party, major grassroots Tea Party movement just grows out of nowhere. All these Tea Party organizations and groups were blowing up everywhere. And Obama's IRS and Lois Lerner decided to slow walk it in order to, and ultimately it was all about controlling the outcome of the elections by slow walking and stopping this grassroots movement. Well, it's back in the news now as two holdovers who have continued at the IRS, who were actively involved in that IRS scandal, have suddenly been placed on leave. And here to discuss is somebody who actually had a front row seat to the abuse that went on, and he actually was involved. And it's Mark Meckler, an American political commentator, attorney, and president of the convention and co-founder of Convention of States. And he joins me now. Hey, Mark Meckler, welcome to the Andrea Kaye Show.
Thanks. It's good to be with you.
All right. So I was surprised that this was back in the news. I was surprised because I was surprised that there were still some holdovers from what happened at the IRS. So I'm not sure if I accurately summarized what happened, Mark Meckler. So if you could remind everybody the egregious behavior by the IRS and what your role was in that and where we need to see accountability going forward.
Sure. So back in 2009, 2010, the Tea Party movement starts up. We have the largest sweep in Congress between parties. 62 seats that were formerly Democrat go to Republican. That's the largest since 1938. Great success. And so the Tea Party groups all over the country, really over 2,000 of them, are growing. They're strong, and they're trying to figure out how they operate. And remember, these are just mom and pop groups. They don't know anything about being a nonprofit or setting up organizations. So people started advising them that they need to go out and get their nonprofit status from the IRS. And so hundreds and hundreds of these groups start applying for that status. And the IRS then decides to choke down on this. Actually, President Obama himself came out in public and said something like, I think some of these groups might be abusing their charitable status. Mm-hmm. Maybe the IRS ought to look into that. Of course, he claims he didn't tell anybody to do anything. And then, amazingly, the IRS begins clamping down on that. Lois Lerner was the lead person over that, Holly Paz. And so these women were in charge of putting together what they call the BOLO list, be on the lookout list. And these lists literally just said, if a group has Tea Party in the name of it, then you need to slow walk that and you need to choke that down. And I was right at the center of it. I had friends all over the country in the Tea Party movement, and a lot of these folks were leading these groups for my friends. My local group in Northern California got choked down like this, and they put together a list of something like 40 demands that these people had to have. Things like, we want to know the content of your prayers. We want to know every book you've recommended people read. We want the content of every speech that's ever been made. I mean, these were outrageous, unconstitutional demands, and the entire point was to choke that movement down so that it would be less successful in 2012. And indeed, they were successful at that.
Yeah, they were. I'm flashing on, it's been a while since I reviewed this story, but I'm flashing on tax returns being illegally exposed as well.
Yeah, I mean, not just exposed. It is illegal for the federal IRS, these agencies, to cooperate with local states to give them information. We have lots of friends who got flagged by the IRS. They got audited by the IRS personally, and then they got audited at the state level as well. Mm-hmm. For example, in California by the Franchise Tax Board. So, yeah, they were doing everything they could to traumatize, terrorize, and shut these groups down. And a lot of them ceased to exist because of this.
Yeah, and I can remember being really angry at how feckless the Republican Party was in handling this, because this was a scandal that 60%, and this was long before we even knew what we know now in terms of the deep state and the weaponization of the government targeting citizens for their political views. This was kind of the first time that we really felt that 60% of Americans were outraged when they found this out, because if there is one agency or department that unanimously, or, pretty much all Americans can agree on that they despise and fear is the IRS. It's the only department that can consider you guilty until you prove your innocence. And so the majority of the American people were like, this is outrageous that we've got the IRS just going after these groups and behaving in such a manner. And they had the typical Republican hearings, and nothing was done. Nobody was held accountable. Lois Lerner is off somewhere, living fat and large off of her pensions, taxpayer-funded pensions. Her replacement, some man, didn't clean house, obviously. We still have 2 holdovers all these years later. Let's talk about accountability and what should happen going forward.
Yeah, there was no accountability. This is classic deep state. And in fact, I would argue it's the exact opposite of accountability. On the left, if you do something to persecute Christians, conservatives, anybody on the right, Republicans, you will find yourself promoted. You will find yourself, even if you happen to get in trouble on the off chance, you'll find yourself in another agency with a better job. And honestly, I think that culture still exists largely in the federal government. So to me, this is a harbinger, hopefully, of better things to come. We're starting to see President Trump, people are pointing out to him, hey, you still have people in the admin that have done really bad things. And he seems to be taking action. I was really shocked to hear this was going on. I heard at the beginning of the admin they might do this. It was something that I suggested they do, that these people who were in charge were people who should be taken care of. But I would add it goes much deeper than this, because you have to remember, it wasn't 3 women that did all of this. There were literally dozens and dozens of employees who were involved. All of them knew it was wrong. All of them knew this was unconstitutional. They would use the excuse that, well, I was just doing my job. But that excuse shouldn't fly. And anybody who touched this stuff and didn't complain about it and was no whistleblower, they should all be gone. Yeah,
because this involved offices all across this country. I can remember some in Ohio, because I have family in Ohio at the time. This is a reminder, too, of the idea of that, and the excuses some conservative commentators were making involving the FBI and the DOJ, the Russian collusion. Oh, it's just a few people at the top. No, this goes deep and wide. And the only name that we ever really got was Lois Lerner. And now we're seeing Holly Paz, Elizabeth Katzenberg. Nobody who had their fingers at all on any file or any involvement whatsoever should have been allowed to continue in the U.S. government. And it's not enough for me that they be put on administrative leave. I want these people prosecuted for their abuse of power.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. At the time, I actually helped to lead a lawsuit against the IRS, ultimately settled in a multi-million-dollar settlement. That wasn't enough. One, I don't want taxpayer dollars going to pay for this. These people should have been personally liable. We tried to do that. The courts would not allow it. But I actually think they should be in jail. I mean, to me, it was sort of a life quest for me. Lois Lerner is out there, as you said, living fat and happy on a government pension. At best, she should be working at a McDonald's, and really, she should be in an orange jumpsuit somewhere.
Absolutely. How can people follow you and see all your work, Mark Meckler?
Yeah, they can go to conventionofstates.com, or they can follow me personally at Mark Meckler on X.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's just a shock that these people are still at the IRS. And it's also a reminder that because nobody paid a price at that point, it just enabled the deep state, and the administrative state to just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And we're all suffering. And it's all tied to like the DOJ and the FBI and the Russian collusion hoax. So accountability is how we end this. Thank you for being here, Mark Meckler. I appreciate it.